Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Great to have people from all over on. I guess I'll start with just a few housekeeping items. Welcome, everybody. This should be a very interesting and informative conversation this afternoon or evening, depending on where you're joining us from, with Erica. Hear a bit about her 2025 Solitaire and what she has planned next. So on the format side, what we'll do today is I'm going to introduce Erica. She's going to give us an overview of what she's been up to and what is coming down the pike next for her. Then we'll go into some question and answer. I'll start with questions that we received in advance of the conversation today. During the conversation, please hold your remarks. Please, if possible, stay muted. You're welcome to stay on video, but if you don't need video, it's okay. Also, go ahead and drop any questions you might have into the chat for everyone so that they can see what's been asked if they have additional questions to ask. And once I've asked some questions, we'll be entertaining those questions from the audience. Time permitting, I'll actually ask you to unmute and join us on video if you'd like to. So if that sounds all right to everybody, we'll wait just another moment. We're just up to about 30 people, almost 30 people now, and there were quite a few joining us, and I don't want anyone to miss out. I'm guessing that you all know Erica, but I'm just going to introduce her anyway. Erica Lesh is a high-performance offshore sailor with more than 80,000 miles at sea. Her experiences include a circumnavigation and major ocean crossings in a Mocha 60 and Class 40 race boats. In 2025, she competed in the legendary Solitaire de Figaro as only the third American to do so. She is carving her own path to the top while working to open more pathways for women and emerging American talent in ocean racing. So with that, thank you, Erica, for joining us today. If I could ask everybody to please ensure that their microphones are muted for the time being, and we can open those back up when it's time to ask some questions. So, Erica, I think we're safe to go ahead and start. I know some other people will be joining, but that's okay. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Thank you guys so much for joining. It's I'm not in the US very often and I don't get a lot of FaceTime with all of you, so this was a really nice opportunity to be able to share what I've accomplished with a lot of your support and also some of you coming in who might be interested in the experience for yourself. I'm really happy to be able to share it with you as though we're almost in person. So I'll just tell you, as Heather said, a little bit about what last year was like and and why that's significant. Can you all see my first slide? I got some nods. Okay. So this is a little bit about what it's like inside the Solitaire. Next slide, come on. Sorry, guys, I'm a better sailor than Zoomer. It's not going. Here, slide control. Okay, sorry. So, the Solitaire de Figaro, you might wonder why I chose this particular challenge. And for me, it is simply based on the fact that I was looking for a better pathway to develop in offshore sailing. In the US, as many of you will be familiar, we have an incredible development platform available through junior sailing and then through collegiate sailing as well. And those were pathways that were available to me growing up, and I really dug into them. I had amazing coaches through high school and college, and when I graduated, I was very eager to get into offshore sailing, and I had no idea where to start. So we have this really nice structure, and then suddenly the pathway becomes more like a spider web. It's really based a bit on luck and there are these rogue opportunities out there. You've got to be in the right place at the right time. And a lot of things go into having the opportunity to get offshore and then to have quality miles or actually race, it's a whole other game. So I was really fortunate to spend 10 years in my crazy sporadic pathway, and I've done a circumnavigation, I've raced through the Southern Ocean, and I've had, as mentioned, a lot of great opportunities on racing boats as well. Um, but what's interesting is that in France, there actually is a formal pathway for offshore sailing. Some of you may be familiar with this already. Um, in France, if you want to go into offshore sailing, you go through the junior sailing program similar to what we have, and then you go into the mini fleet, which is a 2 or 3 year campaign to race solo across the Atlantic in a very small boat with no technology. And then the next step up is to do the Solitaire de Figaro, which is one design fleet, and it's all based on like 600-mile long races, more or less, which are all around the Atlantic coast of Europe. This is really difficult navigation and also shorter races, so you can go and get your ass kicked and then go back to the dock and learn your lessons and then go back and do it again. So it's very rigorous. It's a little bit more affordable than well, it's a lot more affordable than class 40s or boats bigger than that, and it's very competitive. The next step up, you go into class 40s usually, or straight to a mocha, and then you can compete in Transat Café Lourdes, which used to be called the Transat Jacques Vabre, Route de Rhum, or at the top of the pyramid, you have the Vendée Globe and the Ocean Race, which are now done in IMOCA 60s. And the French pathway is really interesting because it's not just that they have these classes that you go into, but they actually have training centers throughout the country, which I was lucky enough to be entered into last year. Um, I'll come back to the solitaire. Uh, hang on, I'm going to skip ahead. So inside the training centers, um, it's really an interesting situation because these, like I mentioned, these training centers exist all over France or all over Normandy, Brittany, and Vendée regions. And this was actually a picture from yesterday. So this was the training centers are very holistic. They involve the training on the water with a group, with coaches following you in ribs and taking pictures while you're out there, after which you go to a debrief for 1 or 2 hours to discuss what the coaches have seen during the day. In addition to that, you've got classroom sessions of, you know, learning, digging deeper into navigation. Sometimes you have a course on coastal effects, and sometimes you have more offshore strategy, learning the navigation program. Sometimes there's courses on composites, managing refits, and really any aspect to running a campaign. We also have physical coaches, I guess. Like you've got maybe 5 or 6 workouts available a week that you can sign up for. And what's really interesting, what's really interesting is that this is available to a huge number of people. So I'm part of a group that was formerly known as Laurent Grand Large. It's now changed names, but it's um, it's got groups of sailors in Mini, in Figaro, in Class 40, and in Imoca 60. And what's interesting is the group cohesion that exists even between the fleets. So in this picture, it's a little hard to tell. This is like half the circle of who we had training on the water yesterday. In this picture, there are 3 coaches all in one shot. Our 2 primary coaches, and then Paul Milhat came to coach as well, and he's a former Vendée Globe skipper. Violette d'Orange is just on the right. She came to sail with one of the other sailors. And Claire Lebeau is she's the skipper of Upwind Ocean 50, and she came to sail with one of my colleagues as well. So it's very interesting to see the level of sailors that come back even into the Figaro fleet to help everyone develop. And I don't go to the swimming classes that we have a couple times a week, but a lot of my friends are training in the pool with Sam Davies, and the fact that you're really all together. It's a very inspiring environment, and there's a lot of knowledge that gets fed down because of that group dynamic. And the reason this has been really efficient in France is also that the costs are shared. So we're all paying into the classes, the coaches, the infrastructure, and so per sailor, it's really very reasonably priced. It's maybe all in a few $1,000s a year for a whole year of access to training. Um, and they organize weather routers. It's all based on sharing the resources we have, how to develop as best we can. I wanted to share that with you. Um, I'll back up a little bit. So 2025 in review, as you may be familiar, we broke the year into stages. I'd been trying to build a campaign for a couple of years prior, and finally in 2024, I realized that I had been planning to go around the world double-handed in Class 40, and the timeline was getting shorter, the budget was getting bigger, and it just wasn't reasonable anymore to dream so big so soon. So I scaled back into a solo campaign into the Solitaire de Figaro and I spent all of 24 seeking corporate sponsorship. I've had quite a few years of learning about this pathway. It's very unusual in the US to have corporate sponsorship, but it's very, very common in France. So once again, I'm taking notes from the country that's been really successful in this, um, just trying to find an accessible way into the top levels of this sport. And for me, that means kind of taking this into the American dream format is of if you can make this a business plan for a company and you can find the deliverables to a corporation, then you too can get to the start line of the major races. But in tandem, I've also got to develop my skills, and that's why in fall of 2024, I began fundraising and was very fortunate with a lot of support to get to the training stage of 2025 last January in France. Um, so we already talked a little bit about what that training stage looked like. It lasted several months of training like that, 3 to 4 times a week on the water, and then the rest of the time in the classroom and actually preparing the boat. After that, there were several months of qualification races, so you can't just enter the solitaire. You've got to finish at least 2 qualifiers within a certain time limit of the first boat to finish. And these are actually difficult races because the format is you have two 2 days of buoy racing, basically, which buoy racing solo is pretty tiring. As you could imagine, you're doing it all yourself. So they tire you out in the first 2 days, and then they send you on a 48-hour offshore, which never really goes so far offshore. So you're always, um, I would say it's harder to sleep on these 48-hour races than it is to sleep in the solitaire because you're always close to shore or near fishing boats, you're near your competitors, and there's a lot of things to be aware of. Um, I was pleased to qualify last May to have it qualified for the solitaire, and then in June and July, I had the opportunity to go back to the States um, to participate in the Bermuda 1-2 with David Southwell. So he actually gave me a huge leg up, and he let me do the solo leg out on his J121, and then we double-handed the boat back. And that was my first solo race of over 600 nautical miles, which is the same length as any one leg of the Solitaire de Figaro. So I think I'm not alone in when you think about solo sailing, your first thought is, oh my God, how do you sleep? And that was really a nagging question in my head. Like, okay, in the qualifiers, I learned I could get through 48 hours, but I wasn't sure how I would do on a 3 to 5 day race. So the 5 day race to Bermuda was very, very helpful just to know when you hit your limit and to know what that feels like so you can be preventative in the future and because yeah, obviously you don't want to get so tired that you put yourself in danger. So that was really valuable to have the practice race. And then the Solitaire itself was in August and September of last year. It lasts about 3 weeks of racing. It's probably about a month if you include the race villages at either end. And it's incredibly intense. And we'll get into that in a little bit. And this the solitaire has been around for over 50 years, but very few Americans have participated. And the year before I participated, there were 37 competitors and only a handful of foreigners. None of them were American. And in fact, last year I became the third American ever to compete. And so looking ahead, just briefly, because I know everyone has asked, what am I trying to do this year? This year, I am trying to go back into the Figaro 3 fleet. It was clearly very effective for development. I got in, I think it was 7,000 nautical miles on the race course. I think 28 nights at sea on the race course, and you just can't get that amount of development in 1 year in any other fleet. It's pretty incredible. So. And clearly I've got even more to learn from my great competitors. So I would like to go back to the Figaro 3 fleet. Ideally, I can compete in the Solitaire de Figaro, but you may notice that it's not at the end of the year. They've thrown us all a curveball and they put it in May and June of 2026. So that condenses the timeline to get to the start line. And it also puts a pressure to find the majority of the budget sooner rather than later. And what's interesting is that to make up for the solitaire being sooner, they filled the rest of the season with double-handed development races, which is actually pretty interesting because you can do that either with a peer who's going to challenge you or with a coach on board. And some of those races as well, really there's one race that they're holding in middle of August. They're starting at middle of August, and it goes from the Vendée region of France, which is sort of in the middle on the Atlantic coast. It goes down around Madeira and then to Portugal, and then back from Portugal back up to Vendée. And this is really interesting because most transatlantic races, well, yeah, really most transatlantic races, unless you're starting in the Canaries, you're starting in France and you've got to go down to the trade winds and then go across. So having this practice navigating that exact route, it's very valuable for future races and to be able to do it with a coach on board or with good coaches to debrief you between legs, it's has a lot of potential for development. And zooming out at why I'm here and why I'm trying to improve in this fleet is to give you a perspective on how the French pathway, how I could insert myself into the French pathway would be entering the Vendée Globe start line as soon as 2032. And I've tried to split this up into types of boats to clarify how it could work. Basically, I'd like to continue sailing in the Figaro fleet for several more years. It's with other Vendée sailors coming back into the fleet, it's just I don't think there's any better training ground. But there are opportunities to do more transatlantic races in 2027. Um, the next Vendée Globe is in 2028, which is too soon for me. And I've got to start working with a sponsor before that and build up a partnership with them. So the idea would be to develop for several years and take on a sponsor during that time, and then hopefully acquire an IMOCA in 2029 after the Vendée Globe finishes. And then you have the option to compete in the Transat Café L'Or, which was formerly known as the Transat Jacques Frog or TJV. It's hard for us to say those sounds in English. Um, and a route around the following year, and then a preparation year for the Vendée. And the ocean race is what is abbreviated below that. The ocean race Europe, the ocean race Atlantic, and the ocean race itself. Those are also opportunities to get IMOCA miles, which are required to qualify for the Vendée Globe in 2032. So that's just a bit of like zoom out of what's possible here. I mentioned the three phases that we were training in the winter months. And the first solo races happened in March, April, and May to qualify um, for the Solitaire last year. These pictures were from the last qualifier I had, and I actually there were lots of hurdles last year and lots of results I wish I had done better, but there was one qualifying race where I placed eighth in the offshore, and that was it's like those little moments where you have nailed something are so reassuring when you're putting yourself into something really competitive to keep going. So that was really proud of that one. This was going under a bridge, so this was an amateur photographer who goes there every year for the Figaros to take photos of them going under the bridge. And the final stage, of course, was the Solitaire itself, and you can see how tight the fleet is. This was what the course was supposed to be for the Solitaire last year. Um, we were meant to start in Normandy, go around Fastnet, come back to Brittany for leg one. And in fact, this region is pretty infamous for bearing the brunt of the low pressure systems that fly across the North Atlantic. And that was naturally happening at the time of our first start. So they altered the course. Instead of going straight out to Fastnet and back, we drew a star across the English Channel. We crossed the English Channel 4 times, and it was a huge challenge because not only did we have the strong winds, the reason they changed the course was to keep us further east so the wind would kind of blow off and we wouldn't have to go into the Irish Sea. But the challenge was that we had spent months with a road book of every possible local effect to learn in the planned first route. And so by changing it to this, it was like, okay, we'll throw out the road book I've been looking at for the last 3 months and let's see how we get on. And we started the race in pretty light winds and very light and fluky wind, actually. I had an incredible level of stress before the start, which was definitely affected my performance in the start and the um, don't think this is probably not well publicized, but so you usually have a spectator course right after the start, and that leads right into the offshore portion. Um, so that spectator course, I left the dock feeling kind of calm, but quickly the stress came back up before the start, and I had a malfunction with my computer, and I lost, basically I didn't have any nav information, and having just received they only announced the spectator course the morning of, so you can see how quickly this would compile into a heap of stress, and I was pretty flustered. It managed to do all right on the first leg and make up for some of the stress that I was battling, and then but then once we went downwind, I sailed too far from the cliffs. It basically was very fluky wind, and if you weren't calm and perceptive and taking in your surroundings, you were prone to make a mistake. And I did, and I on the Figaros when you sail into a lull, if your kite collapses, the lazy sheet goes underneath the foil. And so you've got to rerun the entire sheet. And that happened to me right as I was needing to jibe. So I sailed past my ley line to the leeward mark, and that was not a great start to the first leg, which was already going to be a huge challenge. But it was still really incredible to sail. We sailed um, basically directly west, the way the wind was from Le Havre to over to the Continental Peninsula, and then we were short tacking the coast and as night fell, and it was still very light wind at this point. And even though I was in the back of the pack, we were still meters from each other, and it was incredible to watch like all of the nav lights together swaying. Just looked like you were in the middle of the stars or something. And at one point there was a boat maybe 5 boat lengths in front of me, and we were all on one tack with our code zeros, and he Uh, he um he basically spun around in a 360. It was really light wind, and I thought he had just overshooted his code zero, and I just started laughing at him, thinking, oh, ha ha, what a silly mistake. And then I got into the same spot he was, and my boat did the same thing because there was a little eddy in between the rocks. So it was a very fun night. There were a lot of passing zones, and started to get back into the groove after a frustrating start. It was a really fun first night, getting your head in the game, and then um, getting across the English Channel. And I can't detail the whole race for you because it will take several hours, but it basically a very interesting first section, and then the second half of the race we had gale force winds, and that storm finally hit. We had several fronts come through in this race, and it was just very challenging to deal with, but fascinating. I could study this one leg for months and still keep learning from it. This is a snapshot of this is actually the start of leg three when we had a little, um, the short course after the start and before the offshore. This should have been a spinnaker leg, but because it was such a small racing area, they didn't allow us to fly spinnakers, for risk of damage. And you can see why this was how close everyone was, even with just code zeros allowed. And I mean, we were rounding marks 3 or 4 boats wide. And at one of those mark roundings, I got on the inside, just very pleased about. And then a few boat lengths later, one of my competitors had stalled out. And so we had to either go above or below him, and I ended up having to go below him. So it's just incredible how much you have to manage on the boat, how quickly you have to actually deal with normal tactics, and you're on your own. It's a really big challenge. This shot on the left is from that first night when we were all really close to each other, of the first leg. And the other one is the picture on the right is from the start of leg two, which had sustained 30 knots. We almost never reefed these boats, but on that start line, half the fleet was reefed. And you can see my mainsail actually looks kind of terrible because the tensioners in my battens had shaken loose from the slamming in the waves. And this is sort of a range of emotions at the end of some legs of the solitaire. You can see I'm pretty tired on the picture on the left, and but also really proud. That was after the end of the third leg, and the one on the right is just a lot of emotion to process when you haven't slept for 5 days. But it's incredible what you go through out there. And I'm sure you guys will have more questions about the race itself, so I won't go into too much detail yet. We'll get into the questions, but I was really happy through my campaign to be able to include mentorship and opportunities for other women and young Americans in as they progress as well. Um, n- Notably, girl Rory came out to work with me for one of my first qualifier race, and I desperately needed the shore support, and I didn't have the funds at that time. And she was 18 years old, interested in offshore racing, and had enough saved up to come over and work with me. So she helped me for a couple of weeks, preparing the boat, delivering it with me, getting a little sailing in herself, and then actually being the shore support when I was doing my first solo qualifier. And she has aspirations to do a mini transat. So for her, she got to experience what it's like at La Base, the main area in France, and meet a lot of the people here. So that was really cool to be able to involve her. And as I think most people are aware, there's not a lot, like women are still not near equal numbers and representation in offshore sailing, and that has a big effect on continued entry into the sport. So I'm hopeful that by being an additional female face in the top levels of racing, in the Solitaire de Figaro, we usually have about 25% of competitors are female, which is more than most offshore fleets. And I'm really proud to be improving that representation at a high level. Sorry, that's for the end, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we have a lot of questions to go through. Take it away, Heather.
Erica, thank you for the overview. I know we do have lots of questions. I'm going to go ahead and start jumping into those. You mentioned the challenge and what how big it was. Talk to us a little bit about what you're proud of. And you mentioned to me a moment that you shared with one of your coaches who's done, from what I recall, 9 Figaros at this point, 9 Solitaire Figaros. So can you share with us a little bit more about kind of what you came away from this experience with, and what he shared with you that may have influenced how you were thinking?
Yeah, this was actually pretty recent because I my result in the solitaire was I think I had of the boats that finished all the legs, I had one boat behind me, and then there were 3 boats that dropped out from the race. They weren't able to finish or even start the first leg due to injuries and one dismasting. So I was definitely not pleased with the number of my result, and I knew I made mistakes, but I knew I had shining moments, and that it's tough when you're putting intentionally putting yourself into a very challenging fleet. I worked all year to not think about the number, but think about the learning curve and thinking about the concrete. Like your goal should never be the number. The goal should be something else, more tangible. Like I want to nail this weather transition or this or that or the other. And but regardless, I was really upset with my final result, and that was really challenging. And this coach was really helpful. He'd done 9 solitaires. He's now a co-skipper in and he's done ocean race legs on a Mocha 60. And he said that on his last solitaire, that whole season he'd been hitting the podium on his boat. You know, he was so well prepared and he'd he'd done everything right to get there. And then in that solitaire itself, he finished something like 17th. And a lot of people afterwards are thinking, what happened to the solitaire? You did so well all season. And yeah, he really just made a point that it's even when you get a result that you're not happy with, you're the best sailor in the world on any race course is they might sorry, I'm getting distracted by the comments. Um, Even the best sailor in the world is going to win a race and maybe they'll lose a race in the same fleet if it's really competitive. By lose a race, I just mean not winning. But the I think it's really a life skill and it's certainly an athlete skill to be able to reframe failure and to think and to not put it in a number and to think, okay, actually, if you can learn to frame this in a different way, then that skill is going to help you out of a rut the next time. And being, especially in the solitaire, when you're doing 3 legs in a row, if you get a terrible result the first leg, you've still got 2 more ahead of you. So you can't sit in that. You've got to be able to flick that switch and think differently. And it's a lot easier said than done, but it's definitely a muscle I'm learning to build, and it's so important in performance.
I think we're going to take a moment and invite Charlie Enright. Thanks for being on the call with us, Charlie, to chime in a little bit about what you've been going through and speak to the French system as well. So, Charlie, if you'd like to join us, please hop online.
I am online, unmuted, and I got my video on here. What I'm doing now is very different than what I've been doing over the course of the last 5 years. But I think, well, conceivably, the last 5 years are more relevant to what we got going on here with Erica. But I guess first I just want to say that like I've been following Erica's adventures from afar for a while now, and I think what she's doing is extremely commendable. I think she's at the tip of the sword. I mean, she's jumped right into like some of the hardest offshore sailing you can do in the entire world, and I've witnessed that firsthand by kind of being part of the French ecosystem during the lead up to the last um, ocean race. We kind of cut the corner on some of the French stuff. She kind of talked about the pathway and how you kind of start in the Figaro on the Class 40, the Ocean 50, the Mocha 60, and eventually the old team. Like the pathway is very clear there. And I really liked her slide about MBYA, high school, college, good luck, because that's kind of it's kind of how it works over here. But every single person's like journey to where they want to get to is different, and here you do kind of have to make it up as you go along. And I certainly commend, as I said, Erica for taking the big step, crossing the ocean and getting into France, because that's where it all happens, for sure. And as she outlined, that's where you start, kind of cutting your teeth in the Figaro. I mean, when you win the Figaro in France, like they name crepes after you, you know what I mean? Like it's like the biggest accomplishment that you can possibly have. Even folks that are sailing old teams still harken back to how many solitaires they won, and it is really like the proving ground and the base of the pyramid. And yeah, I think it's amazing to see. I think the way that Erica's been able to repatriate, especially in contexts like this, a lot of what she's learned while over there. I've tried to do my part. I know I saw Rich Wilson on this call as well. I know he spent a lot of time over there, and I think there's a reason that everybody has spent time over there speaks so fondly of it, not only from a competitive standpoint, but from a community standpoint. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from how they do things over there. But I think also, if you look at some of the success that we had as a team, we did it in like a uniquely American way. And, that's what Erica is trying to do. So it's great to see all the support for her on this call. And yeah, it's cool to hear for sure. And brings me back to when I wasn't sitting at a desk like this. When I actually got to spend a little more time on the water. So kudos, Erica.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie. We have lots of questions. I've got a couple. Erica, don't look in the chat because you'll get distracted.
Okay.
No,
It's minimized. It's minimized.
when there's that many. So, a couple questions that have it's now come up a few times is sleep. And what happens on the water? You're offshore, and what creature comforts do you take with you? How do you manage your sleep? How would you like to do it differently in that sense, in terms of your preparation and being out there? We got to get to know you a little bit too. We don't want to just hear about the French system. We want to hear about Erica.
Yeah, the sleep one is such a big question, and it's still one I think I'm going to continue learning about. But I've had some great advice over the last year. But to be honest, managing it from what I've done so far to manage it, it's not so complicated. In the month leading up to the race, I wasn't drinking any alcohol or any coffee because those things are known to affect the quality of your sleep. You can easily, some people go a year before your route to Rome without drinking alcohol or coffee, for that same reason. But for me, I was really happy I did find an improvement um, to stay away from those things for a month. I did find a positive effect, and I just wanted to make sure that if I was able to get that 5 minute nap, that 5 minute nap was going to mean something to me. And then another thing was in my 48-hour races, I really found that the 5 minute naps I was taking, like I say nap because you're not really sleeping for 5 minutes, but if I tried to do a really short one, I didn't feel it was really worthwhile. But if I did a 20-minute one, um, it felt real. Like a 5 minute one would be like a band-aid. that would get you through the next hour, but after an hour you'd feel the same way you did to start with. If you slept for 20 minutes, it felt substantial. Um, so I almost wrote off anything under 20 minutes. And if I'm looking at the race course, I'd think, I can't sleep 20 minutes. No, I'll keep trimming or something like that. But I spoke to Phil, who's on this call as well, before the solitaire, and he really advised me to not write those off and take any 5 minute or any size of rest that you can get, even if you're not sleeping, even if it's just laying still. And that's what I took with me into the solitaire, and that was critical. Especially in that first leg, I mean, that leg was just brutal because when you're crossing the English Channel, it's not like, okay, I'm away from the coast, I can relax. You have tons of current, you're crossing TSSs, you've got shipping, you've got competitors. It was really difficult to get quality sleep in that leg. A
Yeah,
little
so
easier when you're
course
going
change
across.
definitely threw you for a loop there.
Oh man, in every way. Um, but yeah, so I basically you get what you can, and if you have the other legs and you're crossing the Bay of Biscay, it's a little bit easier to get longer chunks once you're away from the coast. And we had kind of stable weather. I mean, for instance, on leg two, we started in the afternoon. That first night, you're doing the difficult navigation along the coast of France, and by day rise the next morning, you're shooting off across the Bay of Biscay. You're on going fast on one tack until you reach a front in another day's time. So you have a whole day yeah, you need to be going fast, you need to be trimming, but in that time you can really manage your sleep. So you really just zoom out, look at the events, and then think about where you have to plan for sleep. And as far as creature comforts, I always bring a chocolate bar with me and I never eat it. It's like something I have that if things could get worse and then I could have a piece of chocolate, but no, it's not that bad. It'll, and it's a total mental thing. I'll like cross oceans with a chocolate bar that I won't eat,
Really,
but I always have one.
that's great. So, I think there are a lot of questions about the actual solitaire and also funding. So let's get into a few of those. We are somewhat limited on time. We've got about 17 minutes left. So I just want to keep that in mind. So when did you shift from crewed boats to, shorthanded racing, and why did you make that switch?
Yeah, I made that switch in 2020. At that point I'd put in a lot of offshore miles. I'd done a whole bunch of racing inshore, a little bit offshore, but on the race course, I was always in pit. I was never really getting out of pit. And that's a great role. It's a fun role, but I love sailing, and I love the idea of being an all-around good sailor, and I was never going to become that if I was always staying in pit. Um, so for me, I started sailing double-handed because it was something that forced you or allowed you to learn every single role on board. And it was the best decision I could have made because soon I was racing class 40s double-handed, and there were older class 40s. It was in the US, but it was still these stepping stones just kept coming up, and I kept learning more and more. And I never would have, I mean, the first time I ever navigated in a race offshore was double-handed on a class 40, which is those opportunities don't come up when you're fully crewed, or it's very hard to get them. So that's why I did that.
Um, you've spoken a little bit about this, but how supportive are you finding the sailors around you who are ultimately your competitors? And how does that all work with the culture there and your own it's come a couple people have also asked previous to the event, how's your French?
French is getting better every day. I can definitely tell, in the debriefs I've sat in this week, they were a lot more accessible to me than they were a year ago. A year ago, I had put in quite a lot of time to learn all the parts of the boat, but that does not. I'd be in a room for an hour and I know they're talking about leech tension, but I don't know what their point is. And um, so yeah, I'm really glad to say my French has improved a lot and still not at 100%, but I'm a lot better than I was a year ago. And And that also is pretty integral to the community because some people are really comfortable in English, but most people would much rather speak French. And you don't want to be the person who walks into a room and people turn their shoulder to avoid speaking English to you. So even when you walk into when you come into this space and you don't speak good French, it's fine if you speak French poorly. People are really happy to listen to your attempts and if you stumble too much, then they'll totally switch and help you if they're comfortable enough with English, and a lot of them are. Um, but that's definitely like if you came in expecting everyone to speak English to you, I think you'd have a hard time. And being willing to make a fool of yourself and stumble and make mistakes was really important for entering the community.
Got it. So a number of questions about both the race and the funding. So we'll talk a little bit about the race first. Coop had a few questions here about were there any special regulations for starting based on trying to protect the foils, windward, leeward contests? And then also, why did they make this date change? So you can take those in whatever order you'd like to.
For the date change, yeah, it was really challenging for all of the sailors to deal with that funding change. The date change, I believe, arose because the race organizers were having trouble finding enough host ports to host the race during August and September, which is peak tourist season for them. And they'd be giving out slots in the marina for the Figaros if they were to host you. So I believe that was the incentive to move it earlier. They wanted to move it to June, July, but the Figaro fleet actually has development races, like they call them academy races for fully crewed racing with young and female sailors as part of their pathway. And so those dates weren't available for the Solitaire, and so it got moved even earlier. So the downside is that, oh my God, it's a scramble to get to that start line. But the pro side is that my lessons are pretty fresh from the last one.
And then
But
Coop's question about, why the change, what are any special considerations for those
oh,
start
sure.
trying
The
to windward leeward contest. Coop, you're welcome to come off mute if you'd like to ask your
I,
question.
I think I got it, but butt in, Coop, if I'm wrong. I think you're just asking because we've got these funny J foils. It seems like it would be a hazard to navigation to have us all on one start line, and occasionally you do hook each other, but it's pretty occasional. People are really aware of that being quite bad for their result and also potentially damaging for the boat. It's definitely on my mind when we had that short course and we're 4 rows deep around a mark. I was pretty worried about my foils, but on a start line, I would say people are pretty conscientious of that risk, and so you give each other a little bit more space than you might on a boat without foils because of that. And I think you stall out a little easier because you've got two foils and you've got twin rudders, so I would say you keep a little more boat speed than you might expect on the start line. You don't go much below 2 knots on a start line for risk of stalling out.
Um, let's talk about your fundraising. While this call isn't, a direct ask for support, it's to help illuminate the challenges and the opportunities. Eric and I have talked a lot about how challenges are opportunities in terms of how we look at them. So, what would you say the impact is of the past investment that people on this call and others have made in you? Like, how has that positioned you for future success in terms of, donor support, leveraging that, moving into a sponsor type program?
Yeah, it's been I mean it's a big topic because we have the private donation side and there's also the corporate side. And what was amazing about last year was that I accomplished almost as much off the water as I did on the water, if I can think about the long-term plans. So on the water, of course, I've now done 7 solo races. It was maybe 28 days offshore on the race course solo, and I maybe 7,000 miles racing, and those are big numbers for 1 year without doing a transatlantic. So that was a huge amount of development that I got out of 1 year. That's just from the sailing side, but in the background was also building a media presence. I think there were 80 articles that either were written about me or that I was mentioned in just last year, and all of that is really important when I approach sponsors to be able to show this could be your name, not my name. This has viable prospects for them. And the more experience I get with the storytelling side and connecting the human story of sailing, these we talked about some of it earlier, that the challenges that you face as a athlete and as a sailor offshore, those really easily translate into life, whether you're in a corporate workspace or you're dealing with your personal life. There's always going to be challenges and things you didn't expect and things you have to reframe, and you're going to have to pick yourself back up and fix something. It's always life's like that. Life's a lot like offshore sailing. And so um, there's a lot of ways that the storytelling aspect of offshore sailing can have brand alignment with corporate sponsors. So um, I would really say that both of those things have been developing in tandem with a lot of people offering advice on the side.
I just want to read here what Rich has added in fundraising for those folks thinking of supporting Erica financially. Storm Trysail Club and New York Yacht Club have both been supporting Erica through their foundations and will continue to support the 2026 campaign. Our experience is that Erica is very careful about spending the money and excellent at reporting back the use of funds. Your money is in safe hands. Thank you, Rich, for that comment. It is indeed helpful. So, and Suzy Leech also had a question, like how, getting a sponsor, this next big steps. Yes, there's this year and there is foundation and individual donor support. How are you going to leverage, like, what are your thoughts on leveraging that into sponsorship?
So I've been basically building a platform for sponsorship. Of course, last year with being able to, thanks, Charlie, um, with what we talked about, being able to build a media presence and all of that. But I have spent years researching other campaigns, other structures, and what is valuable to potential sponsors. And so I have like a wealth of knowledge, and I've got some people helping me as well in the background, ready to pitch. Oops, sorry, to pitch sponsors as well. So basically, I feel quite prepared to learn more about what a company is trying to accomplish, and there's a lot of different avenues that we're able to provide that, whether it's branding on the boat or it's internal speaking for their employees, client entertainment. These are all possibilities for the donation side. There's really interesting framework that's been done quite a few times in France where the branding on a boat will actually reflect a nonprofit, and then the corporate foundations will fund that nonprofit. So you'll have, I mean, Initiatives Cura is a very famous one where Sam Davies' boat, now Violette Durange's boat, um, is the branding is for um, providing life-saving surgery, heart surgery for kids around the world. And it's funded by three corporations who receive about 10% of the branding on the boat. And that means that the funding for the sailing program is coming out of multiple buckets of what the corporation has access to. So they're using some CSR funding that goes into the foundation, and then they're using marketing funding that goes into their 10% branding. Their CSR funding into the foundation goes partially into the sailing program, and then they have a hospitality budget as well that can go into the sailing program. So I'm learning a lot about the business side, and I'm now learning this in the French legal side as well. So because I think French companies are also viable if they have a US market. So
That was
yeah,
going to be
it's
my
it's a, it's a
question for
big
you.
topic.
understanding, I think everybody on this call understands some of the challenges with getting sponsors for sailing in the United States. Would you consider approaching French companies that, you've already mentioned that you will, but is that one of your strategies?
Yeah, I think either US companies with European interests or European companies with global or US interests are viable companies to work with. It's a little bit difficult this year with the geopolitical situation in the world. A lot of funding has been shrinking, or people aren't as willing to take a risk on a new idea if they're not familiar with sailing. So, in the short term, it's a little bit challenging, but in the long term, I mean, the road book has been written by the French for decades, and it's out there.
We have all sorts of other questions, but limited time. Trisha, thank you. Yes, everyone should follow you on Instagram, and you get 1 million follows. It'll help her with her sponsors. Absolutely. And we will put up a slide at the very end with some information about how to follow Erica. And at some point, please go ahead and drop in where you're joining us from and how you would like to follow along. Because as Erica said, she's doing all of this, and for her to be splitting her time between actual race preparation and training, her fundraising, and the media side, understanding where people want to get their information will help Erica tailor her messaging. And would anybody like to come off Zoom to ask a couple final questions? Or off mute, not Zoom. Or comments? Trisha, again, thank you. You continue to inspire Erica. Go for it. And I'm not going to attempt to speak French.
She said,
This is Suzy. Hi,
That's good.
Erica. I just want to say, as being one of the people that have been trying to help you through the New York Yacht Club, your approach has been noted as being really professional and doing all the right things, and we're really excited to help support you in your campaign. And it's one of those things where I wish that I was young again and I could start this whole thing over again and be in your shoes. But I wish you the best. And I just think that I was going to say one thing is I think that your ability to speak has really improved over the last few years. So the more that you're able to speak and be that bilingual, and be able to branch and be a bridge between the two cultures, I think is really going to help you. So I just wish you the best.
Thanks, Suzy. Thanks for all your support.
We will be, apologies for the noise outside here in Newport. We will be sharing this video with others and with you if you'd like to share it forward. I am going to go ahead and put up a slide here see if I can actually do this. It might be better if you do it. With Erica's information so that you can contact her, follow along. By all means, we will have some dedicated fundraising information as well. I say Erica's doing this. I'm here to help facilitate as best I can because I too, like all of you, believe in what she's doing. But lushsailing.com, at Lush Sailing on Instagram. And if you haven't subscribed to her newsletter already, I would encourage you to do so. Erica, any final thoughts for us? Let's see, we have one new question, it looks like. Oh, just a great call. Thank you very much, Rich. Any final thoughts for us before we say, goodbye and good luck?
I guess for me, we've talked now for an hour, and there's so much more I could say about the event. So if there's anything you really want to know, shoot me a message. I'll do my best to answer you or make a video or something because I really enjoy sharing it. I think it's really important, and it's such a huge experience, and I'm so grateful for all of you who helped me get this far. It's a massive step.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you all for joining us today. Erica rooting on no questions, but Instagram preference. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of people will like Instagram. Nice work, and keep it up. We're excited to follow along on the rest of your adventure, however long and however high it goes, which I hope that we're following you along to the bond day. If that is your goal, we're in your corner.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon and evening. Erica, go get some sleep. You're in France. Thank you all. Have a great day.